Even though it's a cold morning, but the sun's out, it's good to see everybody here for our meeting today. So we'll get started. As usual, you know, I have a few messages. Right. Okay, coming up Tuesday is the gun violence prevention meeting at Lyons Township High School. All the details are back on a flyer at the table where you came in. So they're hoping for a big turnout. They've got some really great speakers, so hope some of you can attend. On the other side, we're trying to save paper, is our next meeting, which Cheryl has arranged for us on criminal justice and restorative justice. And so I think that's a topic that we really haven't touched here, and it should be a great meeting. So if you want all the details of the speaker and everything, it's back on the flyer. Again, take one. You know, if you go to Panera, if you go, you know, you're in a condo building that has a bulletin board, wherever, just stick it up. You know, people, you know, see it and then they come, or just pass it out. I've been known to have them in my purse and talk to someone, and then my husband looks the other way. It's either books or. We will be doing at least one candidates forum in March in Oakland. If you're interested in helping out with that, you know, if you want to say, oh, I've never done it before, there's lots of jobs. You know, it is fun, right? And that's where I started out. I was a timer at one. You know, some people start out handing out paper and pencils. I mean, there's a lot of different things that we need, you know, to have a successful candidates forum. So if you want to get involved, it's sort of fun. It's just a couple hours. I think they have 6 candidates, so they'll run a couple hours. But it's really interesting, even if you don't live in that district, to see, you know, what the issues are. You know, sometimes it's very amazing what they're all upset about. You said like that.
Is it a school district or is it a township?
School district.
123. LT. 123.
Yeah. So it's you know, just you know, very interesting time, and you know, we really believe that's one of the worthwhile projects that the League of Women Voters maintains, because it really helps, you know, communities learn about their candidates, and so really it is grassroots. Okay, so the next meeting, the April meeting, mark that on your calendar because it's about the Electoral College, and we have League of Women Voters member from Arlington Heights. Buffalo Grove. I knew it was up that way. She's coming down to present it for us. There's been a very active group up north working on this. They've done a wonderful PowerPoint presentation, and they've really delved into the subject. So they'll really be able to explain it to you and tell you the League's position on that. So mark that one. Then while you have your calendars out, save the date for May 8th. That will be our annual dinner at the Orland Country Club. Okay? Tony is there with the purple top. She does our gift baskets, so you can start gathering them things. If you know, you go to a hairdresser, you go to Panera or someplace, ask them, you know, like for a gift card. You know, we like to do these gift baskets, and that's about the only, you know, fundraiser that we have for the year, and it just helps us our operating.
If you need a letter with a tax ID number on it to get to your places that you go, please email me. It would be more.
Yeah, we should.
Because people aren't, you're not just going to walk into someplace, they're going to just hand you a gift certificate. Right.
Yeah.
If you have a letter and you have the tax ID, that should help you.
Right. And our local businesses, especially ones that you go to, are usually very generous with us. And so you may say, okay, you pay dues. Just a quick reminder, our dues really just cover all the dues that we have to pay to the local and national league. So, you know, we're not frivolous, but, you know, you have to have postage, a few other little things to keep the organization going. And so this gift basket raffle works very well for us.
It's fun.
Yes.
It's fun.
Yeah, it is, it's fun, and it's amazing, what you can do, and, things you may have, it's one place you might re-gift something brand new, but it doesn't fit for you, so you can do it. And I forgot to mention that we have our gun buttons, so if you want to take one for yourself, for a friend, whoever, go ahead and take them. We have plenty, and I hope to see you. I'm planning to do one.
And no charge.
No charge. It's one of the things, they're on the back table, and it's one of the things that we think that we should be doing. Did you want to do the introductions? Explain? This program was arranged by Arlene. If you haven't checked the back table, she has some wonderful articles. She's one of our great readers. She reads more than I do. Okay, Arlene.
Well, we're really pleased today to have Jan Hessler with us. Al and I have known Jan for 40 years, maybe. We've worked together, and Jan has, for the last almost 20 years, given talks to groups like ours about the environment. His scientific credentials are impeccable. He has a BA from Kalamazoo College and his PhD from Michigan State University. Then he went on to Queen's College in Kingston, Ontario for a couple of years, and then came back to Argonne. And while he's been at Argonne, he's studied a number of things, including heavy elements, heavy radioactive elements, nanoparticles, and his latest research has to do with characterizing soot, which is actually a very interesting thing. So Jan has talked many times to many different groups. I'm sure he would be delighted if you questioned him mercilessly. But anyway.
Thank you, Arlene. And please, if you have any questions whatsoever, just raise your hand and I will see if I can answer it. I actually did a stint at teaching undergraduates, and so I'm hardened to bad questions. There is no such a thing as a bad question. So please, we'll try and iron it out before we get too far. Also, I'd like to thank you for inviting me. This is the second time I have given this type of talk since in the last year. And as you'll see, at one time I did sort of retire and said, well, there's nothing else I can do, but the situation changed. And we'll talk a little bit about the changes in that. Also, I want to point out, if you want to disagree with me, fine, but I don't speak for anyone. No organization, this is all on me. Our topic today is, well, the future of the Paris Climate Change Agreement. And the bottom line is, the world is progressing. Positive progress is being made, and like and I will try and point that out. Okay. I always like to start with the science because it's all finished. Can anyone here tell me the biggest change in climate science since 1979? The premier idea, the breakthrough? Well, very good. That's a trick question that a professor used in his class on atmospheric science. He said, there have been no breakthroughs. All of the science is basically finished. They use equations that were developed in the early 1800s by a couple of really bright scientists. A man by the name of Arrhenius identified CO2 as the element that's heating the atmosphere significantly, as well as other greenhouse gases like methane. That was done in 1895. So the fundamental science is finished. However, we have taken advantage, not myself in particular, but the scientists in this area. They're using faster and larger computers, better measurements, so therefore their predictions, which is what science is all about, given A and B, what will happen, okay? Their predictions are much more complete and precise about that. So that's where the advances have come recently. I'm gonna just take you back, show you a little bit of the fundamental science. Energy comes from the sun, hits the earth, some of it bounces off the earth, goes back out to outer space. Some of it never makes the earth because it hits clouds and gets reflected. Some of that energy in the clouds goes back, so it goes out, and the atmosphere itself goes back and forth. So it is a fairly sophisticated system. But as a very famous scientist, Fourier, pointed out in 1827, the atmosphere acts like a greenhouse gas because it lets the light through, but it doesn't let what he called the dark rays. Now we are very sophisticated. We call them the infrared because you can't see them. They're the long wavelength parts. We see the visible part of the spectrum. So this is the light that's longer than the light that we can see. Okay, so that was finished back then. And now there's an issue, and I have actually seen this on television. They talk about burn our clean fuel, okay? There is no such thing as a clean hydrocarbon fuel. To be fair to the people that have made this advertisement, what they're really saying is our fuel doesn't create any soot. Okay, but the point I want to leave you with today, it does create CO2. Okay, if you're going to burn anything, you want to burn methane. It is the most efficient hydrocarbon fuel you can find. By that I mean it gives the most energy per carbon atom that is released into the atmosphere. Methanol, which is another fuel, it's a little bit less. Octane, down about 60%. This is sort of like the gasoline we burn in our car. The coal, which is used to fire a lot of power plants, is somewhere in the 30 to 40% efficiency of methane, which is why most power plants being made today, they wish to burn methane. They don't wish to burn coal, and they're actually converting some coal-fired plants into methane-fired plants. So that makes sense. But every hydrocarbon fuel produces that CO2 molecule. Just fundamental high school chemistry. Can't get around that.
Excuse me, is it okay to interrupt and ask a question?
Sure.
So is the gas that comes to our home, is that the natural gas, is it like nothing?
Yeah,
Okay.
the stuff you burn in your stove, for example,
Okay.
that should be mostly methane.
Mhm, okay.
Yeah. In fact, we just moved from our home in the center of Downers to one near the end. And we went from a wood-burning fireplace to a gas fireplace, okay? So wood is probably down here. I haven't done the calculation, but in terms of the amount of junk it makes, which goes up your chimney, but now when we light our fireplace, we're burning methane. Why is CO2 important? If you take a look at what leaves the earth, This curve here is actually a curve called the black body emission curve, which was postulated by a man by the name of Planck. It was the beginning of the quantum revolution in science. So quantum mechanics explains all of this, but the crucial point is the red line is the atmospheric, the radiation. Right smack dab in the center is an absorption band due to the CO2 molecule. So that energy right at the peak of that curve that wants to go into outer space is getting absorbed by the CO2 molecules up in the atmosphere, and then half of that energy will come down, back down to Earth, the other half will go out into space. And it's that half that's coming back to the Earth that's causing the problem. And of course, there are other molecules involved in that, water in particular, ozone, and the like. But CO2 is the number one bad actor. So what do people do? In fact, for those of you that get the New York Times, Arlene put this figure, or this copy, it's Thursday's copy. They have added data to the end of this particular curve, but in particular, we're saying how much warmer than an average temperature is the Earth experiencing. 2016 was the warmest year the Earth has seen in a long time. Millions of years ago it was warmer, no question about it, but modern times, 2016. 2017 the second, 2015 the third, 2014 the warmest. And I converted the information in the figure from degrees centigrade into degrees Fahrenheit, because when I borrowed the paper from the man in the local library to get the article, he was bitching about using degrees centigrade. So I thought, okay, we'll change it to, you see it's up there in degrees centigrade. Well, I've converted degrees Fahrenheit. I hope that makes your heart feel far better. Yes, ma'am.
They say that if you have the hottest temperatures, like people say, oh, there's no global warming problem because we're so cold now, you know, with the vortex and all that.
Mhm.
But is it true that if it's the hottest in the world, then it becomes the coldest temperatures too? That one affects the other?
Well, they do affect one another. However, there is an important distinction we have to make. The difference between climate and weather. What we experience every day is weather, and it goes up and down and you know, all over the place. And what we're talking about is climate. If you will, in fancy math terms, we integrate the weather over the entire surface of the Earth, and we average over 365 days a year. That's what this is talking about in terms of the temperature anomaly. So the weather is always fluctuating. And when you look at some of the calculations, one of the predictions that comes right out of the calculations is the fluctuations are going to be larger. So we are going to have colder winters and warmer summers than we have in the past in terms of a local weather phenomenon. And the reason for that is there's more energy in the system. And so the system has to deal with that, and it deals with it by creating tornadoes and doing all sorts of things which are perfectly natural to occur, but because there's more energy driving that system, things are larger. it's, you know, conservation of energy. Okay.
It makes total sense. It's just like one sentence, boom, good job, thank you.
Another thing, and I've heard this quite a bit recently, well, the Chinese, you know, and they're emitting, and the quoted number. They're absolutely correct in the number that they quote. It's a large number. The Chinese are emitting more CO2 than the United States. However, Chinese have a much larger population. And these arbitrary lines that we draw on the globe, this nation, that nation, you know, the scientists say if you're going to compare things, you compare apples to apples, you compare oranges to oranges, but you don't compare apples to oranges. So if we're going to compare one nation to another nation, we've got to somehow normalize. The easiest way to do that normalization is divide by the number of people. And so when we do that, the per capita energy consumption, the United States is above 300, China is about 75 right now, heading for 100. That's a factor of 3 per person lower. And I don't think I have it today, but you can make a graph of the gross domestic product, corrected for years and all this other sort of stuff, as a function of CO2 emissions. Tracks in a very nice straight line. The better your economy, the more energy you're using to support that economy. And that is the crux of the problem right there, is they are right now directly tied in.
So, excuse me, so we're going down a little bit in the 1970s. Is that because of the economy or just because we've made some changes in, you know, energy, like our fuel, kinds of fuel, you know? Looks like it's going up.
The United States has been going up in CO2 emissions per person every year.
From, okay, 1974, it looks like it was a little higher.
That's energy consumption, though, are two different things, right?
There's energy consumption tied to CO2 emissions.
Yeah,
Right.
somewhat, to a certain extent, right? I mean, but we have a lot more wind power now, we're using more nuclear power. And again, between us and China, China uses a lot of coal. You know, they're using wind too, et cetera, but it's really complicated. There's a lot of things that, this chart shows something important, but there's a lot of other things
Absolutely.
that are also important and that need to be layered onto this
Mhm.
to understand.
Yeah, if you want to, then you know, you could, for example, ask the amount of CO2 per acre of land mass. That's a reasonable. You could ask per ton of natural resource stored in the ground. There's all sorts of different ways you can express the same data, depending upon the discussion you would like to have in there. And
So we're not actually doing better in 2010 than we did in 1971. It looked like it dipped a little.
well, for example, you mentioned 2010. That line, it hits that 300, we go back to 300 in 1983, and then in 1970, it crosses, it goes back, goes down, and they didn't use data below 1965, or earlier than 1965.
I was looking for a ray of hope.
Oh, well, yeah, hopefully you will leave with one. Yeah.
So this includes all energy? wind,
Absolutely. Yeah, it's just per capita energy consumption. That's a fancy gigajoules. Probably nobody knows what a joule is, but that's a unit of energy that the scientists like. And we in the United States refuse to use that same unit, so okay.
We see that on our power strips once in a while.
Yeah. If you want to sell your power strip in Europe, they don't know what a watt is over in Europe, you know.
John,
Yeah.
I just want to say a little bit to your question. In the last 10 or 20 years, we've converted a lot of coal-fired plants to methane plants because of the rise of fracking, which made methane very cheap compared to what it was in the past. In the past, methane came just from the usual oil production, but fracking introduced sources of methane cheaply that were unconnected with oil. So a lot of power plants switched towards methane, and that has certainly helped the U.S. not track up so much as it normally would. And it might be part of the reason why there's sort of oscillations that you see over the course of the years.
And Al alluded to, you may have heard of horizontal drilling, which is relatively a new technology that allows them to extract the methane quite easily. You know, if all you do is drill straight down, you'll get the methane in that core. But if you pick a spot and then go this way, now you get all the methane at that level. And the geoscientists, this is what they worry about. How do we extract this natural resource most efficiently? The more efficiently we extract it, the more profit we make. Okay? So.
If you look at modern drilling maps, you'll often see the spokes of a wheel, right? As Jan was saying, the central well that goes in, and then radiating out from that are these horizontal wells. And they stick in various kinds of chemicals and things like little hard pieces that then shatter the rock. That's what fracking is. So if you imagine a well with a large wheel area around it, where all these spokes are releasing the methane trapped in this shale, and then pumped out. And part of the problem, well, I'm not getting into that. Part of the problem, of course, is that you're disturbing the structural integrity, which causes leaks in other ways that may end up with your methane in your water table.
Yes?
Forgive my naivete.
No.
Relative to natural resources such as coal and wood burning, and such, how much methane is available? I mean, I know cows are producing it daily, but so are we, I guess.
I really don't know the answer to that question. And I would suspect it changes as they make new discoveries. We found a new field of this natural resource, or we've got a new technology that can extract that. So people are working, you know, actively on this, but I don't follow that literature. Okay. Now, one of the things that's important, and somebody told me the other day, well, you scientists just haven't informed us. Well, a group of scientists led by an atmospheric scientist by the name of Roger Revelle gave a report to Lyndon Johnson. Lyndon Johnson went before Congress in a special message. And this, I quoted right from his message. Steady increase in carbon dioxide from the burning of fossil fuels. Okay. So the people of the United States and our government was informed in '65. There have been a lot of other people that have done similar things. Let's see if I've got a slide. Well, in the 70s and 80s, Jim Hansen, that's when he was the head of NASA U.S. agency. He went to Congress. In 1992, 1,700 scientists says, you know, we're on a collision course, folks. We've got to make changes if we want to basically stay alive the way we are living right now. And it was signed by 1,700 scientists, and a message to the entire world. And these scientists are not exclusively from the United States. A lot of them are from Europe and other countries, but large, but very large. Okay, and then the year 1988 is important. A man by the name of Bill McKibben wrote a book, The End of Nature. That's the first book written for the general audience. So he was trying to communicate to you and me, his science is good, no question about that, but he's not addressing a scientific audience. And President Obama came out with a Clean Power Plan in October of 2015, and there was a resolution in 2015, and ultimately the Paris Climate Agreement was signed by 195 nations in 2016. And it's here that I says, well, my particular contribution to this endeavor is finished. You know, the scientists applauded the climate agreement. It's definitely a step in the right direction, but it's a little step. What we need to do is take a big step, okay? But hey, it's better to take 2 little steps if that's all you can do, right? So that's sort of the scientific situation. Then last year, on the 6th of October, a report from the IPCC came out, a special report. What's the probability of global warming? 1.5 degrees centigrade. Hey folks, we got to do something before 2030. We've got to really get the decline going.
I'm sorry, IPCC?
International Panel on Climate Change. It's a United Nations organization. Probably every nation that signed that is allowed to send a delegation to participate in the writing of that report. And when you read the report, I think a page and a half lists all the authors. I mean, it's a highly collaborative effort area. Yes, Al?
The Obama Clean Power Plan had a 32% reduction for 2030. On the slide after this, there are warnings that we have to get CO2 emissions to start declining by 2030. Does 32% reduction from the U.S. lead to decline in CO2 emissions?
The answer to that number is somewhere in the figures. I have not addressed that particular issue to give you an answer off the top of my head. But I'm sure it is there. You know, I mean, you and I both know we could look at those 2 graphs and figure it out. Yeah. I found it interesting that 2 days after that report, William Nordhaus, who is an economist at Yale, was awarded the Nobel Prize in Economics. And what he said back in the 70s, hey folks, this is a major problem, and if we want to solve it equitably, we just tax the carbon. And we just haven't done that. I mean, you know, I don't know. Let me just ask you, how many people here studied economics when they were undergraduates? You know, okay. So you know, not that many. Well, That's why, on that first slide, I was very careful to put BA, Bachelor of Arts. You know, I couldn't get out of undergraduate school without taking a course in economics. So Paul Samuelson is still on my desk. His textbook on the Introduction to Economics. Okay, yeah. This is the Republican Party platform. What can we say? We look toward the private sector's development of new state-of-the-art coal-fired power plants, low cost, environmentally responsible and efficient. I don't think they defined environmentally responsible or efficient. Now, these are some of the.
Do you have what the Democrats' position is?
Basically, we're going to get to that at the end. It's called.
We just want, fair both sides.
No, you're absolutely right. If my memory serves me correct, Nancy Pelosi had a bill that went before Congress in the climate change issue, and it got defeated. So these are things that have happened. The coal mines can pollute. We used to save the methane flares. You can't build a transport system. You pull this methane out of the ground, you got to get it from there over to the power plant where it's going to do some use, so you got to have a pipe. Every pipe that any man has made leaks. Okay, we all know that. Well, they used to, they would leak methane, they would flare, but that's not taken care of anymore. Withdrawn from the Clean Power Plan. And they would like to pull out of the Paris Agreement, but we haven't done so yet. Okay, not officially. Okay, there's talk about it. Now, you asked about the Democratic plan. Last Thursday was an interesting day, and Arlene put this out there, and this is the front page of the New York Times last Thursday, announcing this new Green Deal. And I highly recommend that you get your copy of the New York Times, read the article, and follow some of the references. And they will refer to articles in Nature. This library, I haven't checked with them, but they should have the journal Nature. It's one of the premier journals published in Great Britain. They also should have Science, which is one of the premier journals published in the United States, in a similar type of an area. But they put forth a proposal, and I went on the website and actually got the actual proposal that was submitted, word for word. And it doesn't have a detailed plan. It basically says, hey folks, we've got a problem. Let's sit down at the table and let's solve it. I mean, that's the gist of that. Also, and this is a very positive step, the representative, Alexandria, and I really don't know how to pronounce her last hyphenated
They
name.
call her AOC.
Pardon?
They call her AOC.
AOC, okay, AOC. One of the reasons that she did step forward is there was a movement called the Sunrise Movement, which is basically young people who have looked at the situation, and they went to Nancy Pelosi's office last year, and they banged their fist on the table and said, do something. And it was Representative AOC that actually came to that group and spoke with them and engaged them and the like. And from that came this Green New Deal. And that name is well chosen in the sense that it conveys the same idea that Franklin Roosevelt had back when people were unemployed, a New Deal. So what we want to do is we want to remove carbon from the economy, but at the same time, we want to create jobs in doing that. And one thing that, I grew up, my dad was an engineer, and he always said the role of an engineer is not to destroy jobs, it's to create jobs, okay? If you don't keep your people employed in a nation, you don't grow. And we just have to do that. As well as they would like to have what they call a just transition. Nobody wins more than anybody else. One would like everybody to win, but you don't want to have really big winners and you don't want to have any losers. Okay, just a transition. Okay, now what I'd like to do, this is the end of my slides for today. Got a lot more on there from previous ones, but this is brand new, last Thursday. Yeah?
We've heard some talk in the past about taxing carbon, and that plan included a way that companies that were going to take a long time to get where they need to be, or wouldn't be able to produce it, could buy credits from companies who could accomplish it. Do you think that's a good plan? How did it get started?
I think it's a reasonable starter. You have a coal-fired power plant. You would like to convert that power plant to methane, but then you turn around and you say, oh, I got this $20 million debt to the bank on building this power plant, and it's in the 30th of its 50-year loan, Well, you've got to respect the bank and its investors, so you've got to accommodate situations like that. But what you can't have is you can't treat that company the same as you treat a company that's 1 year away from paying off their debt to the bank, you see. So you've got to be equitable. And I've got to admit, that is one of the questions. What is equitable? How do we really define equitable? The only way to do that is to get the actors sitting around the table and come to an agreement. There's no, as they say, no one shoe fits all people. Yeah?
Well, I'm just amazed that the cars get bigger and bigger and bigger. I mean, it's like some of the cars are so big now, and I really feel that they should pay a tax because they are polluting more than a smaller car. And I don't know why, if you've ever been to Europe, they all have littler cars, and it's just, but the cars, I don't know when it's going to stop. I mean, the Yukons and, oh my God, the huge pickup trucks. It's just.
Yeah, but as she mentioned, have you ever traveled in Europe, rented a car and driven around Europe?
I've been to Europe a lot, but I've never,
You've never gone to the gas station to fill it up. The cost of gasoline in Europe is much higher than it is here. And that's where you get this idea, let's tax the carbon, okay? Now, I'm not gonna say that the Europeans aren't taxing the carbon, but they're definitely taxing the gas, you know, and things like that. But yeah, this is a way to equalize things. When you put a tax on the carbon, you let the customer decide, am I willing to pay twice as much for my trip to the grocery store as I was in the past? Maybe I should purchase a bicycle. I can pay off the bicycle in 2 weeks, and I can get some exercise. But you're the one that has to make that decision.
Get the smallest windshield. Yeah, or get the smallest Mazda. You don't have to have the, you
Yeah,
know.
one of the things that I think it would be helpful is, could you imagine your life if you gave up one automobile? Just, you know, either sell it or don't drive it. How would that impact your life? I mean, that's what we're really talking about. But I grew up in the 1950s. Most families only had one car at that time, you know? Having a car, one car, was considered a luxury. So,
A lot of parents, one of both parents often stayed home and then.
Correct.
Well,
yeah.
Or live very close to where they work. That
Yeah.
was the situation. They could walk to work.
I have relatives in Sweden, and she has a small car, but she also takes public transportation almost everywhere she goes.
Mhm.
And when she comes to visit, she has no problem hopping on a train, and, you know, she is surprised when we want to drive it. She's also very conservative, and she takes a shower, and very clean, and we don't do that. They've learned to be more conservative.
Yeah,
And for them, it's really right.
that's right. Yeah, it is a total change of life. Yeah.
Do you think the autonomous car might offer some sort of an improvement on that?
Yeah, anything that eliminates the,
And you'd only need one car because if you
yeah,
take it.
if you only need one. Although, if you get rid of one of your cars, but then you substitute that with the anonymous car, well, you're still emitting the same amount of CO2.
But it could take me to work and then just sit and park for a while and then come back home and pick up my husband. Sit for a while, because most of our cars sit in the garage probably 70%.
Well, they're not admitting that.
Then, yeah, they're not admitting that. They're only admitting when they're going from point A to point B.
Right, so getting rid
Yeah.
of
Sir, in the back.
So what's the difference between an electric car as far as emissions and, you know, somewhere the energy has to be created?
That is a good question. And
I mean, you're getting it from the power plant instead of,
you're getting it from the power plant, and then you have to ask, where is the power plant getting it from?
Yeah.
And right now, the vast majority of the power plants are fueled by hydrocarbon fuels. However, in the state of Illinois, we have more nuclear power plants than most states in the United States. So, and you really can't say, I'm getting my power from this power plant over there. Maxwell said, no, you can't do that. So what you have to do is say, what percentage of our electricity are we generating from fossil fuels, and what percentage are we generating from nuclear power? To answer that question. And let me just give one other example. When I was a young graduate student, 66 or 67, a man came out from MIT, and he spoke about a magnetic levitated train. And they were going to build this between Washington, New York, and Boston. The corridor in there. We scientists says, that's a fantastic idea. Let's use it. Because we were thinking that could be powered by a nuclear power plant. And we could have today, magnetic levitated trains going from Chicago to Los Angeles to, they could basically replace air travel. And if we use nuclear power to power these power plants, at least we wouldn't be emitting CO2. And let me then turn a question around. Nuclear power in this country is a dirty word. Don't ever dare bring it up. Why?
3 Mile Island.
Because of the people that get rich from the other power, they wouldn't like that, right?
Okay, that's an economic argument or a
The
financial.
perceived danger,
Pardon?
the perceived
It's
danger.
not
The
perceived.
perceived
It's
danger.
fact.
And what is the perceived danger?
The danger, the ways go wrong and, yeah, nuclear power contaminate things like Chernobyl.
Chernobyl, or, what is
3
it?
Mile Island.
Fukuyama, 3 Mile Island. Okay, what if you take all of the impacts from those incidents and stack them up against the earth warming? How does that come out in your?
And also another part of that equation is if you look at the accidents and the detriment, just as an example, in the coal industry and in fracking.
Or the pipeline rupture.
Exactly, so all of these different sources of energy have serious consequences in certain places to certain people. And putting it all in one equation, the whole economics thing, putting it all in one equation is really complicated. But there are all these things, and any one of them isn't necessarily a lot worse than another, unless you consider all of the things, including like the battery cars. So these battery cars, you have to make those batteries. You have to mine those chemicals. Those chemicals come from some of the most oppressed places in the world, in Africa, et cetera. And you got to spend a lot of money to mine that chemicals and process that chemicals. And so this whole economics and social justice equation is really complicated. It takes a lot of smart people to sit down together and say, what's fair for me, what's fair for you, what's fair for the people over in China or India.
But then they want to have to be fair. And we don't always have that.
Right, because guess what? Not in my backyard. And what are you saying? You're saying, not in my backyard. And no, I'm not buying a smaller house. Or I'll give up my extra car, because guess what? I can only drive a car at a time, so, take the train.
That's what I was going to ask. I bought a Prius thinking I was doing the right thing, and then someone told me the making of the battery is worse for the environment than the energy savings. I don't know if that's true.
Well, yeah, that battery uses unique materials, and it has to be disposed of when you finish it, so, through the lifetime of the car, those are one set of environmental costs, and then the disposal, when you got to dispose of all cars, there's another set of environmental costs.
It's complicated. And how do we bring people together to do this?
We've got greed being
Right.
involved too. Greed is another factor, that somebody, we ideally would like to be equitable, but there's always gonna be somebody who's gonna say,
Right.
Another social issue that Illinois is facing is with electric cars, they don't pay gas taxes, which goes to fix the roads. And so now they're trying to come up with ways to tax electric cars, so they get funding to pave the roads.
How much do you think it helps that the new governor has said that they will not drop out of the Paris Agreement?
I think it helps tremendously.
There are other states, is like what?
Yeah, there are 16 other states, here's, here. I think our governor was number 18. This is a step in the right direction. We are going to commit to this, And one of the states involved is California. California has a state whose economic and human activity is larger than many countries in the world. So that's a step in right direction. Yes?
Can you give us a scenario that would accomplish those three core principles? You know, I like examples. How would the first part create, you know, how would we get jobs and who are these large?
Oh, okay. One of the things discussed in the literature is we have to rebuild our infrastructure such that people can get from where they live to where they work on public transportation. And we've seen that, you know, the reason I live in Downers Grove, it's very convenient to the commuter train for downtown Chicago.
So that would remove carbon from the economy.
That, yeah.
Where would the
that's-
jobs come from then?
Yes.
And
Well,
who are the large-scale public investors?
Well, anybody that wishes to make investments in, say, the development of a magnetic levitated train.
Is
that
that the one
goes
they have
from.
in China?
Pardon?
Is that the bullet train in China?
Yeah, the bullet train
Yes.
in China. And, you know, this is what we discussed. The engineers know how to do this. They could build this train that would create all of these jobs. Think of it as what Eisenhower did when he said, we're going to have the international highway system. That created lots of jobs. It opened up communication between different cities all across the United States. A magnetic levitated train would do that. Let me ask you people, who knows the difference between a fourth generation nuclear power plant and say a first generation nuclear power plant?
Trying to stop,
Pardon?
get old, age.
That's not what I was thinking, but. Yeah.
They're more inherently safe.
Yeah. For example, in the fourth generation nuclear power
Are they building them today, fourth generation?
in France,
Okay.
No, not here.
but you have your power plant here. You recycle the nuclear fuel. You do chemical processing.
At a plant separate from the
No,
nuclear plant? or
that's
in
the whole
nuclear
point. At the site,
Okay.
you extract 99.95, a big number, of the energy that's available to extract from that fuel. When that fuel is finished, its useful life, you take it and you put it in the ground right there. It has cesium and iodine and a bunch of rare earth actinide elements, but way, way lower compared to your earlier nuclear power plants.
And these
So,
plants are running right now in France, or they're being built
Yeah.
right now?
mhm.
And these are, they put them in a leak-proof kind of,
Oh, yeah, you know, in a canister and
Yeah.
stuff like that. You know, they do their best to contain the chemicals with the technology that they have at the present time.
so our
But-
nuclear plants in Illinois, what are they, first generation, second and third?
Yeah, you know, they're earlier ones.
Can they be converted?
Yeah, retooled.
You know, I'm not qualified to answer that particular question. I think my first inclination is, yes, they can. Then I would go and see so-and-so who can give me a more detailed answer. Yeah.
Let me say a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Most people don't appreciate that a nuclear power plant has radioactive fuel in it that is only burned up about 5%, because the radiation damage to the structural integrity of the fuel rod is such that they can never risk a situation in which, when they try and pull the fuel rod out to replace it, it would fall apart. So as a consequence, you produce radioactive material that goes in as fuel in the nuclear power plant, but only about 5% of it is burnt up. Those rods are then taken out and new rods are put in because there's no recycling. So what Jan's talking about is recycling on site. The US plan at the beginning of the nuclear power was that the government would provide recycling materials that would be centralized. The problem with that is, nobody wants to put used fuel rods on a railroad car and send it across country to wherever, New Mexico or whatever, to be processed. So that idea, despite nuclear power companies paying in to make that happen, has never come about. Long-term storage was another idea, but that has not come about because of political problems. So what Jan is talking about is a plan in which you can take the fuel rods out, dissolve them, recover that 95% that wasn't burned, remake new fuel pellets, stick it in new fuel rods, and put it back, and nothing is left to site. That's a chemistry problem that many people have been working on. But you are, from a security point of view, exposing each power plant to active processing of nuclear material. And one can wonder, one can have your own opinion about whether that's a good idea or not, whether it's foolproof or not, whether you couldn't have a chemical fire that would then take all this stuff and put it up in the air. So there are issues about that, but that doesn't mean it isn't insurmountable. And the point that Jan is making is that different countries, like France, have made a different evaluation of the risks than we have. Another thing I would say about this whole topic, which Jan brought up, this is a massive change. To try and get CO2 to go down by 2030, that's a massive change. It won't be solved by putting a few rail lines from here and there. It'll be solved, I believe, or is it just me saying it, by a reduction in our standard of living.
That's all
So
of
when
us.
people say,
In our
why
share.
can't we just have one car? Most Americans would regard that as a reduction in their standard of living. Why can't we buy a big SUV? Most Americans would regard that as a reduction in their standard of living. So the difficulty with climate change is that the problem is in the future. It's our kids that are going to be suffering.
Right.
And for us to address it, we, without experiencing the problem ourselves, have to reduce our standard of living. Difficult to do politically. And hard to do in a technical sense to understand what it is that we should be cutting back on. It's a real tough problem. But I would agree with you on that. Having a discussion about that problem in Congress, that's we should have had that 20 years ago, but all right, we have it now. But it's a massive thing to try and get a decarbonized economy that causes CO2 emissions to decline by 2030. That is
Weren't we making progress with the car manufacturers? We then decided people still wanted SUVs, so went back to that? I recall reading that we were making a little progress towards the kinds of cars that were reduced.
Yeah, so
Smaller cars, electric cars,
electric cars are much better than they used to be.
and
Hybrid
hybrids.
cars are much better than they used to be.
And then they said that people didn't want those, so they went back to making electric
Right,
cars.
we're not buying the small cars.
So, all those cars are great, but they're generally small.
Really, also for families, the gas prices, I was at a conference at the Federal Reserve Bank once, and this guy had a graph that just showed when the price of gas goes up, the sale of big cars goes down. Right. When we were paying $4 a gallon for gas, everybody was buying compacts. Now the gas is $2.97 or whatever.
So Europe solved that problem, as John said, by detaching the price of gas from its cost of production and slapping on a really big tax, period.
Right.
Well, we could go to Canada every year.
Well, look what happened in France when
At
they
least
tried
$5
to
a
raise
gallon right now in Canada, and a lot of that money goes to healthcare.
Right. It's what the tax goes.
Yes.
What will happen if the three principles are not, it doesn't give me a lot of hope. Because, you know what I mean? If they remove the carbon, people are not gonna do that. Federal job guarantees, they didn't want guaranteed. We just have a month off and we might have more. And include a just transition, people are greedy. So if you don't follow those principles, what's gonna happen?
There are papers,
So we're gonna have worse weather?
there are papers that have been published that says your grandchildren and that have a 5% probability of not having great-grandchildren by the year 2100. 5%. That's the end of
Will not have
humanity.
grandchildren?
Yeah. Your grandchildren ain't gonna have grandchildren if that's not fixed.
That bad.
It's that bad. You know, that's what we're talking about.
Well, it's melting too.
I think we all should give, all the questions, so you can see we're all very interested in it. You know, the legal women voted